beast! Ah!
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Not the Bees, the Nicolas Cage filmography podcast. I'm Megs.
I'm Elizabeth.
And this week we watched 2016's USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage. Before we get into this is a true story of the ship that delivered the components for the atom bomb to be dropped on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, and ultimately led to the end of the war. Of World War II. For the purposes of our review today, I'm going to just go through this as a movie, mostly just because a lot of the people that were involved in this shipwreck did not make it out of this situation. A lot of men died in this. It's, I think, still considered the biggest naval disaster in U.S. military history. And so there's just a lot of like license taken in this story because a lot of people just didn't survive to tell the story. So a lot of it is just conjecture. And by any stretch, nothing that we say on the review of this film about this event that occurred is in any way meant to disparage any of the actual people that lived and died and or survived this horrific event. That being said, we will go ahead and get started. This movie does only have 18% on Rotten Tomatoes. We open on a set of Japanese bombers flying towards the USS Indianapolis in Okinawa on March 31st of 1945. They're firing on the ship while the ship's crew are trying to take them down with their own guns. An explosion rips through the bow of the ship. Chaos is erupting. We cut to a room with a projector that's showing footage of the war, and there are old white men around saying that the Japanese have no quit and they're exploring their options to shorten the war, including the atom bomb, but they can't fly the bomb. It has to be taken by ship. Just one ship, no escorts, and it has to be fast. We cut to Captain McVeigh, who's played by Nicolas Cage. He's talking about how war won't end until we kill ourselves off. He's saying this to a picture of a woman who is his wife and tells her about the explosion on the bow of the ship. He then sends a seaman to send something through Western Union. Now we're driving in a car. Two young sailors named Bama and D'Antonio are driving to a large house that's got a bunch of good old boys talking about the war. There's a few young women in the house, and they dance to swing music with the sailors. San Francisco, July 15th, 1945, the USS Indianapolis is getting repaired and receiving delivery of an atom bomb. Except the crew doesn't know that it's a bomb. McVeigh says that they'll be ready to go. He's told it's not a combat mission, only one stop, and that's to refuel at Pearl Harbor. McVeigh asks when to expect an escort, when they're supposed to join him. He learns that there won't be one. It's a top secret mission. He asks if this has anything to do with Project Manhattan, but is instead just given an envelope and told not to open it until they weigh anchor. The sailors are all at the theater. They're watching a film. They're all really interested in girls. Bama and D'Antonio are at a fancy restaurant, and D'Antonio is going to propose to one of the girls. Her name is Clara. While they're at dinner with her father present there, Bama thinks that this is a mistake. Next, we're at a burlesque club, and some of the sailors are drinking and singing and carrying on. Now we're out in the streets of San Francisco. D'Antonio is seen storming away from somewhere while the girl that he's proposed to is rushing after him. The proposal didn't go well. The father doesn't approve. A young black sailor is making notes of this and all the other chaos in the streets. A fight breaks out. Bama and D'Antonio join in. It's 3 black sailors and Bama against 3 white sailors and D'Antonio, but they end up squaring up one-on-one with just the leaders of both groups. Then a couple of officers show up and break up the fight and tell them they've all got orders. Clara has followed them. She tells D'Antonio that what happened between them is between them. She's not her father. She wants to marry him. He goes to give her the ring, but he has lost it in the scuffle of the fight, and he's then dragged away by another officer. The next day, Captain McVeigh gives them a speech about how they need each other and will only succeed if they act like a unit. They all yell, "Yes, sir," and the ship is on the move. Captain McVeigh has a voiceover that tells us the ship is great, but its guns can't handle submarine attacks. That's why there's normally an escort to deploy deterrence. A lot of the crew are boys and they don't understand the danger that they're in. If they're able to spot an enemy vessel in time, they have about 4 minutes to stop the attack, and their best defense is to keep the ship watertight so that a hull breach won't sink them. He calls this mission a glorified postal mission. The two fighting sailors are in the brig. On the deck, McVeigh scares a young officer by telling him about Japanese kaitens, which are basically submarine kamikazes, because they're very, very fast. They're faster than the planes. They're faster than the kamikaze pilots. We're now underwater and we're looking at an Imperial Japanese Navy submarine, I-58, and it's in the Philippine Sea on July 19th of 1945. The captain is in his quarters. He's hallucinating while staring at a photo of an old man in a white robe. The old man speaks to him. He says he knows what he's thinking. He thinks they have a bomb. Two sailors come to his quarters and tell him that they've spotted something. They know that he talks to himself, so this isn't even discussed. The captain looks through the periscope and he sees the ship. He tells the crew to prepare the chitons. He wishes the chiton pilot good luck. The captain checks the headings again and gives the order. It'll take 12 minutes to reach the ship. He asks the pilot if he has anything that he wants to say for the last time, and the pilot says, "Thank you very much indeed," and then launches. The USS Indianapolis is headed to their battle stations. It's a drill. They're firing their guns as the chiton is going towards them, but it appears to miss the ship. On the submarine, the captain is upset. He says it's only a merchant vessel and they missed it, but the officer with him says that the pilot died with honor anyways. Back on the Indianapolis, they are completely unaware. They're performing a defensive maneuver and they reset to go again. From here, we see some black cooks. They're shown spitting in McVeigh's apple pie before serving it to him, and we have to watch him eat it. One of the cooks has also added hot sauce to one of the lieutenant's coffees. We ping pong back and forth across the ship to various places, and we see the crew interact with each other. Tom Sizemore is a mechanic. He's named McWhirter. He's in the engine room. He likes to scare the shit out of his crew member over the idea of sharks eating them if they sink. He says the ship is 13 years old. 13 is an unlucky number, but he thinks they'll make it. The ship does end up arriving at the Tinian Marina Islands without any further incident on July 26th of 1945. The bomb's two components are dropped off, and then the ship is ordered to return to combat, but it is still denied an escort. One of the commanders is retiring after this mission, and the crew throws a small party with a cake while they're all docked. The party ends up being crashed by the same lieutenant whose coffee was spiked with hot sauce. We're going to call him Lieutenant Dickbag for the purposes of this review. And he tells them to clean this up. They aren't getting a leave. They're shipping out. And everyone involved in the party is on mess duty for the next week. July 30th, 1945. It's the middle of the night and foggy outside. McVeigh wants to get through the weather and tells Lieutenant Dickbag that sometimes it's better to be respected than feared. The same submarine surfaces and is able to see the ship. They immediately resubmerge to get closer. On the ship, someone plays jazz over the loudspeaker. D'Antonio tries to start a fight over his missing engagement ring. On the submarine, they confirm it's a military ship. They load torpedoes and deploy. They both hit. The Japanese send two more that also hit, then another two. The ship is in chaos. Everything is on fire. McVeigh makes his way through the ship asking for damage reports and if an SOS was sent. He's very calm and tells people that they're doing good work. The cook gets the keys to the cells for the brig and releases the black sailor who is named Garrison, but then he drops the keys in the water and the two decide to leave the white sailor who's named Connor in his cell. The radio officers at the Leidy base on the island where they left the bomb hears the distress call. He sent 3 tugboats, but his commander tells him to call them back. It could be an enemy sub trying to lure them. One of the commanders tells McVeigh they aren't going to be able to fight through this one, and McVeigh tells him to give the abandoned ship order. The crew runs around trying to pull stuck sailors out of places and grab the ship's documents. The ship starts to take a nosedive. The crew is desperately trying to get to rafts. McVeigh shouts to swim as far as you can and try to avoid the oil. Down in the brig, Garrison has decided to go back and try to get Connor free. He finds the keys and unlocks the door, but as he's trying to pull Connor out, the ship rocks and he falls back into the cell, shutting the door behind and locking them in. Connor apologizes and says Garrison shouldn't have come back for him. Garrison says to pray with him. The ship snaps in half. Garrison and Connor's cell breaks apart and they are sucked below the current, but free of the cage. McVeigh tries to help as many of the crew as he can before an explosion throws him from the ship. We see there are certainly sharks in these waters. The men begin to group together in clusters as the ship finally sinks. McVeigh is somehow separated from the mass of sailors, but is near one of the ship's rafts and climbs aboard. He sees one sailor in a life vest and recognizes him, but when he tries to shake him, the man is dead. The next morning, it's day 1, and there are 902 men in the water that are alive with enough supplies for 2 days. We see a man get pulled under and killed by a shark. Group A of the survivors is 2.4 miles southwest of where the ship went down. One of the men is confident they'll be saved. Bama is concerned the Japanese are waiting to finish them off. Group B is 1 mile west of Group A. Lieutenant Dickbag is in this group and now thinks that he's in charge and says the rafts are only for the injured and officers and to bring all the provisions to him, but no one wants to listen until he fires a gun. The captain is somewhere south of both groups by himself with no supplies. He finds another raft with 2 men, McWhirter and one other person who appears to be dead. McWhirter has lost his right leg in the middle of his shin. He's cradling his severed foot and crying for his son and begs the captain not to leave. Lieutenant Adrian Marks, played by Thomas Jane, a Navy pilot who is flying a seaplane, is searching for another plane that was downed. The sailors see the plane and wave frantically from their respective groups. McVeigh heard the plane and sets off a flare, but the pilot doesn't see them and is ordered back to base. Sharks continue to pick off sailors one by one. On the submarine, the captain has the comms guy report that no one has come to rescue the Americans and to advise what to do. One of the sailors swam away frantically from Group B following a shark attack, and just as he's about to get grabbed by a shark himself, the captain is pulling him into a raft. He asks where the kid came from, and he says there were maybe 100 or more in the group he came from. The captain gives him a shot of morphine and tells him to give it to McWhirter, and he says he's going to take the other raft a little ways and see if he can find them. The kid named Theodore is the same young black sailor from the beginning that wrote about the surrounding chaos of the night before they shipped out of San Fran. He reads it to McWhirter to distract and comfort him. There's a story about a beautiful, strong woman in a red dress that can only be Clara. It takes until nightfall, but the captain returns with another raft and a few men who drifted away from Theodore's group. 2 days later, McVeigh's voiceover is talking to his wife while he's on the raft, and he tells her that it's been 2 days. There's no sign of rescue. He feels that he let them down. He's trying to ration 1 can of Spam between 8 people per day. In another group of 2 rafts, Bama remembers a trip to the theater that he had with D'Antonio and Clara. A man goes to vomit over the side of the raft, and a shark jumps from the water and pulls him under by the head. The rest of the men beat at the shark with their small raft oars. At the captain's raft, he says maybe he could use his wedding ring to fish. His wife would understand, but he couldn't use his Annapolis ring because they need it for good luck. Theodore asks him how they met. He tells Theodore that he saw her in D.C. She was singing to herself. McWhirter wakes up screaming about his son, and the captain gives him more morphine. On the submarine, the captain is speaking to the old man in the photo again. No one has rescued the Americans. They are his enemies, but also men. He's conflicted. McWhirter has ended up dying. McVeigh sobs, but says it will be okay. The fleet is coming. The Japanese are ordered back home at the request of the Emperor. On day 3, Lieutenant Dickbag from Group B says if anyone was coming to save them, they'd have come by now. An island was spotted a few miles away. Another sailor says that's impossible. They are somewhere in the Philippine Sea. But Lieutenant Dickbag says, you don't know that. We're going to catch a wave and float to the island. The sailor speaks again and says the captain would want them to stay together, but Dickbag doesn't care and convinces a few of the others to come join him in his raft, where he's the only occupant, and help him try to reach the island, and says really shitty things to some of the men before he leaves, and he doesn't leave them any supplies, but he sarcastically says that he'll send help when they make it. D'Antonio starts hallucinating in the night that Clara is calling to him from somewhere out in the sea. He tries to swim away, and Bama stops him. The movement has caused nearby sharks to begin circling, and one of the great whites pulls their raft over, and the 2 spill out. As they frantically try to get back into the raft, D'Antonio is grabbed underneath on the leg and pulled through the water, pulling the raft and Bama through the water with them as D'Antonio screams. Garrison and Connor have been sharing a raft this whole time and are drifting through the water and find a body. They have an existential conversation about the man they found dead that somehow has Theodore's book on him, and God and religion and getting back home. They share a laugh. In the morning, we see Bama and D'Antonio in their raft. D'Antonio's leg is injured and is bleeding a lot. He's worried that he won't make it. He makes Bama promise to take care of Claire if he doesn't make it home. Then he dies. Back at Group B, the remaining men that didn't go with Lieutenant Dickbag are bobbing around with sharks when the lieutenant's raft and 3 of the men that left with him paddles back. Only one of the men is able to paddle while the other 2 lay on the sides of the raft. Lieutenant Dickbag and the rest of the men are dead. There were sharks, obviously. One of the officers swims over, and the paddler of the other raft is apologizing, and then sharks attack, tipping all 4 of the men out into the sea. One of the other men goes to help them. He is only able to get 2 of the other men back onto the raft before he is dragged under by a shark himself. On day 4, there are only 330 men remaining. The captain's voiceover tells us many men had given up. Many others were losing their minds. Next, we see Lieutenant Chuck Gwynn flying his bomber plane over the sea. Connor spots it and tells Garrison, but he can't see anything. He's blind. Connor says it doesn't matter. Just wave your hands to help them see us. In the plane, the radio is all static. One of the occupants goes to look at the antenna and happens to see all of the oil in the sea that's spilled out from the ship. He tells them to turn around. At the captain's group, he says the plane doesn't see them, but it does see the oil. The plane goes to fire at the oil, but one of the men says to stop. He spotted the sailors in the water and says to call it in. The closest base is back at the island, and the same radio operator that wanted to send tugboats gets the call, and his commander shuts them down again. He says the Japanese could be out there. On the beach, an officer runs over to Marks and says they spotted something in the water. It could be the plane that they were looking for. Back in Gwynn's bomber, he tells the crew to gather all of their supplies, food, medicine, whatever, and drop it down to them. Who knows how long these men have been without. 2 hours later, Marks flies over. There is a danger that the Japanese could be sitting waiting for another ship to come along. He calls into the base and requests permission to land his plane in the water, but the officer at the base tells him no. Marks decides he's not going to listen, and the co-pilot agrees. The bomber has been flying over the wreck this whole time, and his co-pilot tells him they have to go back. They don't have enough fuel. Marks lands his plane near McVeigh's group, but is closer to Bama's singular raft. He pulls close and calls out. He asks, who are you? What happened? Bama answers. Marks and his co-pilot devise a plan to rescue some of the men from the water by laying them out on the wings of the seaplane. He tells McVeigh he has more room for him, but McVeigh tells him that he's okay. Get his men out of the water. Marks salutes him. Marks radios base again and tells him it's the USS Indianapolis. This is a huge clusterfuck, and you better send all your ships before the sharks get the rest of them. He's laid out some of them on the wings of the plane, but the plane is shot and taking on water. Send the ships. McVeigh's voiceover says he doesn't know why it took so long, but eventually 6 ships come and they were rescued. Back in D.C., the bureaucrats that orchestrated the bomb's delivery learn of the ship being sunk 4 days ago and how few survived. 317 men. Out of, I think it was almost 1,100. Wasn't it like 1,092 or something?
I thought it was over 1,100. It was like 1,197 or something like that.
You're probably right. 879 men are dead. Base Command ignored 3 SOS calls and an intercepted message from the I-58 that had sunk it when they were reaching out to the Imperial Army to ask what to do about the men that were still alive. There will be an inquiry, and the Japanese are on the verge of surrender largely because of the USS Indianapolis. They need to bury the story for now, especially with Pearl Harbor being investigated, but the press is going to want a villain, so they'll just create one. At the U.S. Naval Hospital in Guam, McVeigh visits Bama and asks if D'Antonio made it, but he says no. Bama cries. McVeigh's voiceover says he's one of the only officers that survived. Garrison and Connor find Theodore alive. The crewman that found D'Antonio's ring in the gutter after the fight brings it to Bama. He knew it was his ring, and he was going to keep it and pawn it when he got home. A month later, Japan surrenders. The bomb delivery was responsible for it. Then the war was over, but at home, McVeigh suffers from nightmares of McWhirter screaming about his son and pulling him overboard into the sea. He's also receiving harassing phone calls in the night telling him to burn in hell for what he did. Bama visits Clara. He tells her about his upcoming opportunities, and she wishes him luck. He tells her about his feelings for her. He's loved her since the day they met, and he proposes to her. She tells him she's pregnant, and he says he knows. D'Antonio was like a brother to him. The baby will need a father. He would be honored if she would consider him. Back at McVeigh's house, Admiral Parnell tells him that the case against the base command that ignored their calls is very thin because of the secretive nature of their mission. But 4 days before the Indianapolis was sunk, there was another U.S. ship in the area, the USS Underhill. It was also torpedoed and sunk. McVeigh should have had an escort. His trial will be in D.C. A large group of sailors gather to rejoice and honor their dead. They're going to the trial for McVeigh, and they should be there early. McVeigh pleads not guilty for his charges, which were not performing a zigzag path and not calling abandoned ship in time. He recounts his memory of the event to the court. The commander of the I-58 that ordered the attack, Hashimoto, is also there to testify. He's asked if the ship were zigzagging, would it have made a difference, and he says no. He fired 6 torpedoes from close range. There's no way they could have avoided it. McVeigh is found not guilty of not calling the abandoned ship soon enough, but even with Hashimoto's testimony, he's still found guilty of not zigzagging. He will be court-martialed, and the surviving sailors are pissed. McVeigh meets with Hashimoto outside. He tells McVeigh that this would never happen in Japan. His ship was exposed. They were there. It was his duty to kill him as commander of the Imperial Navy. As a man, he regrets it. McVeigh says he had a good idea of what they were carrying. He too did his duty. As a man, he finds no honor in it. Several voiceovers talk about surviving as we see the sailors pinning photographs of their lost brothers to the wall. McVeigh commits suicide in his study with a revolver in his dress uniform. We see his portrait being hung on the wall of those lost at sea. We see a postscript telling us the first atom bomb was dropped a few days after the rescue of the survivors at Hiroshima, and 3 days after that, the bomb at Nagasaki was dropped. The war ended 6 days later. Hashimoto ended up becoming a Shinto priest. He tried to have McVeigh exonerated until the day he died. 5 days after his death in 2000, President Clinton exonerated McVeigh of all charges. Next, we have a few short shots of 2 survivors talking about their experience avoiding the sharks, and then we see side-by-sides of the characters and the real-life soldiers that they portray. And then finally, we see actual footage of the rescue as the credits play. The end. Elizabeth?
I just want to point out that, like, some of this is going to be edited, but it took 24 minutes to go through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
24 fucking minutes to go through the goddamn write-up.
Yeah, there's a lot that happens in this movie. There are a lot of people that are involved in the movie, like big, war production movies are. I'm interested in your thoughts before you get my take.
So I started out not liking this movie. First of all, there's too many random white dudes in this movie. It's like the cast of 90210 on there. I can't keep any of them straight. And they don't start using their names until like the last 40 minutes of the movie. So I didn't know who the fuck was who.
Yeah.
For most of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And when I mentioned this to my husband, he's like, yeah, well, there weren't a lot of, African-American service members. And I was like, there's like 5 or 6 of them, and they're all very distinct, and they all have various personalities. And I may not know their name because I don't know anybody's name in this whole goddamn movie, but I can tell them apart.
You can tell who is who. Like, which sailor was fighting the white sailor. You know which sailor was the cook that
you know which one was writing the stories. You know what, so like when it would flash back to him, like I think his name was Theodore. When it would go over to Theodore, I'd be like, "Oh, we're with that guy again." Okay, cool. Right. But there's so many indistinguishable white men in this movie that I had a hard time keeping up.
Yeah.
Let's see what some of my notes that I have are. Like most war movies, this is boring as hell. The direction is not good. The sharks look pretty cool. The body CGI is terrible. There are some scenes where the CGI is just
all of the underwater.
Bad.
All of the underwater.
All of the underwater when the ship is breaking apart.
It just looks like the Titanic.
It looks exactly like the Titanic. Also, the scene where the guy like is holding on. Also, they did this in Titanic, where the guy is holding on as the ship like caterwauls up, and then his body he drops, and his body, the physics of it are so off.
Yeah,
that it took me out of the moment.
Yeah. Not to mention we saw that same shot with 3 different sailors.
Yes.
I mean, not the exact same drop, but we saw 3 different sailors hanging on to the rail. Like, that's overkill.
Every time it went back to the shot of somebody holding onto the railing, I'm like, didn't we just do this?
Exactly.
I thought he dropped off. And then they end up in the water, and all of a sudden it becomes a fucking horror movie because there are sharks, and there are sharks everywhere, and sharks gonna eat you. Right. And I know this is based on a true story, but that is fucking terrifying.
It is. And I can imagine that it's incredibly terrifying. But the thing to me that kept throwing me about all of that time is that, like, it felt directionally very much like a cheap sci-fi
Yes.
animal monster movie rather
Yeah.
than, yeah, you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm
Um,
saying.
I loved it when I thought Nick Cage played heroic very, very well.
Yes.
I loved it when Lieutenant Dickbag died.
Oh my god. Wasn't it just like the most satisfying moment, but like you weren't even able to see it, and like weren't you
Yeah,
robbed?
because they row off, and
Yeah.
then they come back without him, like, "We took care of that bastard." The scene between Nicolas Cage and the commander of the submarine at the end of the
Yeah.
movie
Brought me
is
to tears.
really, really good.
Brought me to tears.
Really, really ridiculously good.
I don't know if you could
Uh,
hear in my when I was reading back the write-up that I was getting a little choked up because like it was emotional.
so I will tell you that after the movie was over, I went and looked up the USS Indianapolis disaster because there is no way in hell that they brought a Japanese sub commander over to testify against an American naval officer,
But
right?
they
No,
did.
they totally did. That
Yeah.
is 100% factually accurate. And I was fucking shocked
Oh, it
to
made me
learn that.
so angry to learn that.
I was so mad. I, uh,
On a setup, they spent so much money
yeah.
to set up a man that did everything. And again, ladies and gents, if you're listening, that's why we're giving this like no disrespect to any of the sailors that were aboard that ship at all. This movie was a little disrespectful to them, and so we're being a little bit disrespectful to the movie. But in this instance, that was a really disrespectful thing that the U.S. government did to someone that,
I couldn't believe it.
yeah,
I could not believe it. I literally thought that had to have been made up for the movie and went and researched it afterwards. And it is not made up for the movie. It is 100% true and accurate, and that is bullshit. That's what I say to that. Bullshit. Overall, I liked this movie. It's not a great movie. It's definitely got some problems that we have just gone over, but it it pulled at my heartstrings in the right place. I felt for the, few white guys that you can tell apart. I I felt for Bama.
I did
I
too.
felt for him. And they did a really smart thing by putting Bama and what's the other knucklehead's name?
D'Antoni.
Putting them together in a raft and putting them apart from everybody else, it really strengthened their story because you were finally able to focus on just them and learn their names and figure out what was going on with them versus the scores of other random white guys that are in the water. This movie terrified me. This movie upset me. This movie made me cry a little bit. And this movie made me go and do some research afterwards. And I think that all of that lends to its strengths. On the minus side, it takes a long while to get going.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to tell who's who. And like the movie doesn't really start until the sinking of the Indianapolis.
Right.
And that's a solid 47 minutes into the film.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are largely in line with yours. The very beginning of the movie, like you said, the first about 47 minutes where it was just taking a long time and dragging, were definitely annoying. I get the concept of what they were trying to do, that they were trying to show how many men were involved in this disaster and give them some amount of voice
Yeah.
because so many of them didn't make it back, and that's why we see all those scenes the night before they ship out where they're at different locations and there's just, joyful chaos in the streets, but there's so much going on for a 2-hour movie that it's not cohesive enough
It's
to
not.
keep attention, which I think lends to why it has an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, because anything after that, you get past that point, you are at least engaged. The direction is not great, like we've touched on. The CGI was very bad in nearly all of it, but I think overall, what watching this movie, and it gave me a better understanding of this disaster that occurred, and it, if anything, ended up changing the course of my anger from being directed at the movie to being directed at how this disaster was actually handled.
Yeah.
Because they were telling a very, very big story in a 2-hour window. And while they were not able to do it any real justice, the story is still there now and exposed. And just the lengths to which our American government will go to cover up its own fuck ups, it's astounding to me. And I know that you make decisions in wartime and all of that, but it's just negligent. We had already lost so many men at Pearl Harbor. We'd already lost so many men in Europe. Like, it's just almost 1,000 men died
In one fell swoop.
over the course of a horrific 4.5-day period. And no one listened to them over multiple calls. And yeah. So, my only real issue with the actual movie is a little bit with the writing, because why is everyone obsessed with Clara?
Yeah.
That part, and that was really at the beginning, like, why is everyone like fucking in, like, does she have like a magic pussy or something? Like, I don't understand. Because
Well,
it seems very much like,
you need a focal point.
I mean, I suppose you do. It just felt very much like Pearl Harbor, and like, again, no disrespect to any of the soldiers that were involved in that situation or lost their lives, but that movie is an absolute pile of garbage.
The only person we should be offending and aim to offend when talking about Pearl Harbor is Michael Bay.
Fucking Bay. What an absolute douche canoe. I did have a couple of notes about Cage. I really enjoyed his performance throughout this film.
I thought his performance was steady. I thought his performance was rock solid.
Yes.
He performed heroic and like he was so true. He felt so true.
He felt real. And
Yeah.
for what, I mean, really just for what it's worth, for the whole of the movie, he's really the only person who felt like a real person. Like, I made a note when the torpedoes hit, he's asleep in his bunk. And he's not, a young officer. This is a seasoned captain. He's clearly, in an advanced aged sailor at this point, not like, geriatric, but he's clearly like over 40. I think he's like late 40s, early 50s. And I think he was 54 when he shot him, when he took his own life, whatever it was. So he's an older sailor, and the way he moves when he's woken up by these torpedoes is a small moment of shock, like, what the fuck happened? And then he's walking around the ship quickly but calmly.
Yes.
And you can tell that he is like sleep staggered.
He's leadership personified.
He is. You can just, and he's so calm. He makes sure to tell the people that are freaked out. I could not imagine being the person in the comms room sitting at that station trying to get electrical back up so that I could make an SOS call. What that terror would be like. And to have my captain tell me calmly, just keep trying to get it to work. You're doing a good job. I feel like, I think this might actually be one of my favorite performances of his, because it just felt so real.
I would agree with that. I think so. We're going to give him an A+ for this.
Oh yeah, we're absolutely giving him an A+ for this. It's very, very good. He felt like the only real character aside from Commander Hashimoto at the end, but we don't even really get to see that obviously until the end. But his performances, when we get to see him when he's calling the firing of the torpedoes and the chitin at the beginning, he didn't seem as real as Nicolas Cage's character did. So for me,
if we're gonna give Cage an A+, what are we gonna give the overall movie?
I think
Because it's uneven. The film is uneven.
it's very uneven. It's very, very uneven. And if I look at it from just the perspective of like the technical aspects of the movie, the direction, the writing, the pacing,
It's terrible.
it's not good. It's not a good movie. It's not a good movie.
It is better than its component parts.
It is. I think that I would be okay giving it a C. I want to give it a higher score than that just because of my anger at the subject matter and the story that it told, but
I want to give it a B because it does come together in a satisfying way. It did make me want to learn more about the subject, and
yeah.
it does ultimately hang together, even though those component parts are individually terrible.
Yeah, very problematic. I could live with a B on that. Yeah.
All right, let's give it a B.
So that's going to be it for us this week. This is a B movie with an A+ Cage rating. I'm not going to say skip it because I don't think it's a skip it kind of movie. I think that if you can get to the first 45 sort of boring, very like cobbled together minutes of this movie, I think that there is a rich story to be told underneath. So I would consider watching it. It is a watchable movie after those first 47 minutes. And if you've made it this far, this is probably the longest episode we've ever recorded. But we certainly appreciate you listening up to this point. If you want to continue to follow us along, we are on socials, on Instagram at NotTheBeesPod. We do also have a page over on patreon.com/NotTheBees. If you want to support us monetarily, of course, we would certainly appreciate that. And we would absolutely appreciate if you would interact with this podcast in any way that you can. But for this week, I have been Megs.
And I've been Elizabeth.
And we will talk to you next time, kids.